Okay, well, we'll go ahead and get started. If there's some people coming in, they'll just miss a few of the announcements. Welcome to our presentation today on retirement income as part of Boulder County Senior Law Day 2021. As you can tell, things are still not totally normal. We are presenting our Senior Law Day in a virtual format over the course of about a month. Today's webinar is going to be recorded. The video is going to be available later on the Boulder County Senior Law Day website, as well as on our YouTube channel. And I will put our website and the YouTube channel in the chat in just a few minutes. The host has muted all participants. Please remain on mute unless the speakers invite you to unmute yourself. We have 2 speakers today. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to put your questions in either the Q&A or the chat box and wait for the speaker to invite questions. That is going to happen actually at the end of today's presentation. There'll be an opportunity for questions, but you can go ahead and type your question in whenever you think of it. And just know that we'll be addressing those at the end. We do have some more upcoming webinars. The one on Thursday is going to be really great. It's on advanced estate planning issues. We'll hope to see folks sign up for that. I'm really excited. And we have a whole bunch more coming up next week. We will be hearing from the Medicare fraud team at the Area Agency on Aging and District Attorney Michael Doherty. So if you enjoyed today's presentation, please spread the word. Please check out our website for some additional programs. We are very excited. Ask the Lawyer is back. This is an in-person opportunity to consult with an attorney. We just had the one in Longmont on Saturday, so the Ask the Lawyer that is coming up is going to be September 25th at the Boulder Agewell Center, which is at 909 Arapahoe Avenue in Boulder from 9 a.m. to noon. Masks are required by the city and by the county. And this is just a drop-in legal clinic. It's, well, in addition to the one on Saturday, it is the second one in Boulder County in the past 18 months. So really if you've been unable to access any of the virtual clinics, please take the opportunity to come to this clinic. We are really excited. I will say on Saturday, the one that was just passed, there was barely any waiting for anyone. So please come by, earlier the better, and get some free advice. If you are not able to make the in-person clinic, though, we are still able to partner with Boulder County Bar Association. They are a platinum level sponsor. And for the past 18 months, they have been providing a virtual free legal clinic. Callers are paired up with attorneys for a brief consult on a variety of legal issues. And to sign up, just contact the Boulder County Bar Association, or you can apply online at their website. We are also excited to offer online Senior Law Day handbooks. You can either go to the website, which I'll post in the chat, or while this is on your screen, get out your smartphone and wave it in front of that QR code, and that will take you directly to the Senior Law Day handbooks. These are the 2020 editions. We're still waiting for 2021 to come out, but the 2020 edition has some really excellent information on it. Finally, we'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors. Our platinum level sponsors in particularly have been very generous. Boulder County Bar Association, Pearl Fiduciary, and Fraser. Our gold level sponsor is Jorgensen, Brownell & Pepin, which is a law firm. Our silver sponsors are Hofgaard, a law firm, Bach Financial, and our bronze sponsors are Kingsbury, Johnson & Love, LLC, and the Friends of Longmont Senior Services. With that being said, I'm going to turn over my screen share to our speakers today. And we're going to share a little bit of information about them. First up, we have attorney Brandon Fields, who is his own firm. He has been a Colorado elder law attorney for over 20 years, which is some really significant experience. He has a law degree from George Washington University, and he is the former chair of the Colorado Bar Association's Elder Law section. He is bringing today a wealth of experience, and we are so excited to learn from him. And then our other speaker is Daniel Yerger, MBA, CFP, ChFC, AIF, CDFA, and I'm sure he will explain what many of those mean. But he runs My Wealth Planners. He is Investopedia's top 100 financial advisors for 2021. He's also pursuing a Ph.D. because a few more letters behind his name, I think will be excellent. But he's pursuing a Ph.D. in personal financial planning. He's the owner of My Wealth Planners, a fee-only financial planning firm in Longmont, Colorado. And he also currently teaches investment planning for CU Boulder's financial planning program. So I am just so excited to hear from this presentation today. I feel like I'm going to learn a lot because it's something that I think we're all very hesitant to ask too many questions about. And so this is such a great opportunity. And thank you so much, Brandon and Dan, and I will turn it over to you until it comes time for questions at the end. Thank you.
All right. Well, I think we're both excited to be here and presenting on this. Just to give everybody kind of a quick run through of what we're going to talk about today, we're going to answer the question of what is retirement income. We're going to talk about titling and assets and how we distinguish between those different things. Have some discussion of the different sources of retirement income and what happens when you're going to leave income for others in your family or other parties. And then, of course, we want to talk about Medicaid qualification because that can be a pretty major issue when it comes to your retirement situation. Simply put, let's just define our terms as we're going to discuss today. These are sources of income that do not rely upon your wages or your personal efforts. We're talking about genuinely being retired, being able to take a step back and understand that we are no longer working for a living, which is, I think, probably a pretty ideal place to get to at some point in our lives. Brandon, I think you and I are both looking forward to our own retirement someday.
Sure.
With that, I want to kind of start off with an important distinction to make, and that really is the concept of titles and assets. I like to simplify this by giving a really simple analogy, which is that of toolboxes and tools. A common thing that I think lawyers and financial planners will often hear is, what is a good return on an IRA? And that's not really a function of what an IRA is. An IRA or a 401k, different titles of accounts, really is there to help you understand kind of what tax treatment and special rules exist for the treatment of those types of accounts. Whereas assets are the tools that go inside of those types of accounts or those types of titling. This could be cash, this could be mutual funds, these could be real estate or various assets that you own. Brandon, do you think I'm missing anything there in the analogy?
No, I think that's pretty accurate.
Okay. Well, then let's just go ahead and jump right onto the main topic, sources of retirement income. There's a couple of different categorizations that come with retirement income. First and foremost, I think the most common one that most people will deal with or have experienced or have used up to this point in their lives would be pre-tax. You see these with titles like Social Security, pensions, para, if you've ever worked in the state of Colorado for the state or for a school district. These are IRAs, IRA rollovers, SEP IRAs. You can see the name IRA just about anywhere in there for the most part, or things like traditional 401k plans or 403b plans. The simple principle here is that you got a tax write-off earlier in life when you saved into these, or at least into most of these. Social Security you paid taxes for, but in the case of all these other ones, the basic plan or the deal here is that you've gotten this tax write-off earlier in life. It's grown in a tax advantaged or untaxed way throughout your life. And now that we're at retirement, we're going to have to pay some taxes on that source of income. And that can be a major piece of your retirement planning situation. The other version of this, or the inverse of this is after tax. And most typically here, we're just looking for the word Roth. It could be a Roth IRA, it could be a Roth 401k, whatever that toolbox is, it's going to have the word Roth in front of it. And with that case, we flipped that formula on its head. You paid taxes on that money already, and now that money has grown tax-free, and here in retirement, you're going to get to use it on a tax-free basis. And so you can have money that's both pre-tax and after tax. And I think lastly, then, kind of the most common place we're going to then see any other type of asset is going to be what we call non-qualified or taxable assets. This could be your bank account, your checking and savings. This could be a brokerage account in your name or in yours and your spouse's name. This could be things like rental properties, real estate or raw land, collectibles. Any number of different types of assets that you may have had, but kind of fundamentally here, the idea is that you've probably paid taxes on the money that you used to buy these assets in the first place. And at some point in the future, if you're selling these assets for whatever reason, whether it's selling shares of stock you own, selling a collection, selling a real rental property or something like that, you're also probably going to end up paying some taxes on the back end. All these sources of retirement income can apply in your situation. So it's something to consider. I guarantee every person listening to this presentation right now has at least one of these. If you have even $1 to your name, it's going to be in one of these treatments or one of these types. I think the last source of kind of retirement income that I'm going to talk about here for a moment is annuities, because this is a very common retirement planning and retirement income source. Let's just define what an annuity is really quickly. An annuity is an insurance product. It's designed specifically to reduce the risk that you run out of money in retirement. And I have to emphasize that definition because a lot of people get confused about what these are for, what these do. I think real simply, to just kind of keep it at a base level today, you have 3 different varieties of annuities. One type is fixed. These pay you an unending stream of income so long as you live, or so long as you and a partner live in most cases. And that amount usually doesn't change, or if it changes by a small cost of living adjustment. And there's a lot of research that's been done at the academic level that shows that these are probably the most effective type of annuity. The second type is what's called fixed indexed, and not to overcomplicate it, but they follow an investment index, and they're designed to have no loss of investment from investments risk or from the market, but they also tend to have a fairly low ceiling around how much money they can potentially generate or grow with over time. And the last variety is what we call a variable annuity, and a variable annuity invests both in the stock market or through what we call sub-accounts, and then they have a risk of investment losses. I think the biggest thing to know about these at the base level or as the bottom line is understanding that these are high commission products. People who sell these products are paid a lot of money to sell these products. And also understanding that, again, these are designed to reduce the risk of running out of money in retirement. So if you make a purchase of one of these, if you invest money into these types of products, it's very important to know that that is supposed to be a long-term strategy. These are not good for short-term holdings or for putting money into and taking it out shortly thereafter, because these often have very high surrender charges, which can be significant percentages of the amount of money you put into these insurance policies as a penalty for taking the money out too soon. With that in mind, kind of the last thing I want to touch on here then is just exchanging. Many people will buy insurance at different points in their life. For example, when you were younger, you might buy a life insurance policy to protect your spouse and then protect your kids and so on and so forth. There is something called a 1035 exchange. A big risk that people deal with as they approach retirement is if you talk to the wrong people, they may come to you and say, hey, you need to buy new insurance, or you need to replace your old insurance with new insurance. And that's not really true. If you have existing insurance policies, a lot of them can be converted from one type into another type. And so as you get past the point of life where you need to protect your income or your spouse's income with something like life insurance, you can potentially convert that type of policy into an annuity or into long-term care or something like that. The thing there at the bottom, beware of twisting. If somebody comes to you and says, hey, I know you've got good life insurance right now, but here's better life insurance, you should buy this new policy instead, there's a good chance that that's actually illegal. Twisting is the process of convincing you to give up a perfectly useful policy of one type to buy a new policy of another type. And that is because, again, insurance policies can have really high commissions. And so it's just in the law there to protect you, ideally from being taken advantage of by people who might not make recommendations in your best interest. And I've talked a lot here, so I'm going to hand it off to Brandon to talk a little bit about this before we move on to the next part. If you have any thoughts around these exchanges.
Yeah, and maybe one you can chime in on too, but in terms of taking out money from the investments where you will be taxed, there's a certain level of control, and many people, depending on how, what your budget is when you're in retirement, people often try to use the taxable money last so they don't pay more taxes. But, there is, people aren't always aware that there is a minimum level required distribution that you do have to take out, even if you don't really want to. Can you maybe comment on how that works?
Yep. So when you turn 72, you have something called a required minimum distribution. And that is a requirement to take money out of pre-tax retirement accounts, including 401k accounts, IRA accounts, and any type of pre-tax asset you have. What happens is every year you have a certain amount of money on December 31st in those pre-tax retirement accounts. And starting at age 72 and every year thereafter, you have to divide that amount by a number. And that number starts as a big number. So what comes out is small. Let's say it's $100,000. You'd start off dividing that by about 25. And so you'd say, okay, so that's about $4,000. And you're going to have to take that money out of that IRA or out of that 401k early on in order to satisfy that requirement of distribution. And that's going to produce some taxable income. As you get older, that dividing number gets smaller. And so you have to take out bigger and bigger pieces of those accounts. So it can be really helpful to coordinate with your tax planner, your CPA, or anybody who's helping you in your retirement plan around how to potentially try to reduce the forced distributions later on in your retirement by planning earlier about where you're taking income from.
That makes sense. And another thought I had was in the realm of annuities. I have run into issues for seniors with the surrender charges. So sometimes my experience, is that you start off with a new annuity and you have a high surrender charge, something like 6 or even 7%. If you try to basically take the money back out. And that over time, that amount does go down. The problem is sometimes people are selling you that annuity without regard to, where you are in your lifespan or where you are in your potential financial needs. And one thing I've seen, I don't know, I don't sell products as part of the law practice, so I'm not as familiar with how frequent we see these things, but I know that some of the annuities do have an exception to the surrender charge for if someone has to go into a nursing home or a facility like that. And sometimes that's a lifesaver because the annuity doesn't really work for them in that situation, and they're able to get money back out. Is that a very common exception that you've seen, Dan?
I would say it's going to be a case-by-case exception.
Okay.
Annuities often come with a particular special purpose in mind. There are some annuities that are designed to help fund things like long-term care. But that's something where you really do have to read the fine print. And in particular, I have to emphasize, you want to be sure you're reading that in writing. Verbal representations around these contracts are not very useful. They tend to come with several 100-page long documents disclosing all the whatabouts and ifs. So those exemptions can exist in certain types of contracts. You just want to be very careful that that's the type that applies to you.
And that, that's another thing that I've seen in my practice. Sometimes, the people selling the annuities are insurance agents of some sort. And I see people who've bought an annuity a long time ago and the agent has retired or passed away, and they don't realize, or we end up having to focus on the fact that the annuity is a contract, and there is a document that says what you get and under what terms. And many people don't even look at those because they're relying on the agent. And now the agent is gone and they don't really know what they've got. So it's important to review your contract, even with the agent at the time you're getting it. Because as Dan was saying, the things the agent may have said in the past are not really relevant. It's the contract itself. And you're dealing with an insurance company basically as an annuity provider. So, and that's one where a lawyer or a financial planner probably can be helpful in reviewing what's there and how it fits into your current financial plan for retirement.
Yeah, I would strongly second that. I think anytime you're going to purchase an annuity, whether it's from an agent or if some other professional has recommended that you purchase one, get the second opinion. If you're going to buy an annuity and you're talking to an insurance agent, great. Have your attorney review that before you sign on the dotted line. If your financial planner is recommending it, great, talk to another one. These are, again, really considered to have a long-term purpose to make sure you don't run out of money in retirement. You just want to be really careful before you put a big amount of your retirement savings into one, that you're getting what you think you're buying, and not that you're sort of taking the word of one party or making assumptions about it. That's another common mistake I see, is sometimes people are kind of trying to get their cake and eat it too, and they think it's going to do two things at once, both provide great investment value and also guaranteed lifetime income. We have to remember that their purpose really is one of those things, not both. I think the last area of sort of retirement income that we're just going to touch on briefly here before we start talking more about taxes is going to be reverse mortgages. These are newer, kind of in the spectrum of potential sources of income. But one of the most common things we see for people in the United States is that we tend to have a lot of our money in our homes, particularly in the Boulder County area where real estate has appreciated so much. The purpose of a reverse mortgage is to essentially create a stream of income where you're borrowing against the equity in your home to provide you with a loan, which is tax-free, and that provides a stream of income to you in retirement. This is good if you're not planning on relocating, if you're expecting to kind of have a long, healthy, happy retirement, and you're not interested in leaving behind a significant estate. Maybe you don't have children, or maybe your children are doing well and they don't need you to leave something behind. These are not a good idea, however, if you were planning on relocating, or if you have health or mobility concerns, or if you do want to leave bequests to your family after you pass away. These are another case where I often see people misusing them. Not that they know that they're misusing them, but they think it's going to do one thing for them when it does something different. So this is another really good case where you want to call somebody like Brandon and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Does this actually make sense with the estate plan that I've created?
Yeah, and just to comment on the reverse mortgages, because we do live in an area where there's a lot of equity in people's homes, I have seen really good results where people want to remain in their home toward the end of life, but they require extra care, and they have a lot of equity, but they don't have a lot of cash or investment savings. Particularly taking like a reverse mortgage as a line of credit and then drawing on it as they need it for care. One unusual thing about reverse mortgages, that's a little different than having a regular mortgage, is that if the person passes away, then the reverse mortgage, gives you only a limited period of time to pay it off. So generally you've got 6 months, and you've got to either refinance it if you're, let's say, an inheriting child, or sell the property. And so sometimes where I've seen that not work so well is, for example, where there's a disabled child living in the home, a disabled adult child, and they don't have the income to refinance. Yet it was the parents' intention that they, have that home to live in. And so they can be stuck and have to sell the home and buy another one. So that's a thing to think about ahead of time, when you take one of these. Okay.
Well, then let's talk a little bit about controlling taxes in retirement. And here we're just going to highlight some valuable immediate takeaways that you can try to keep in mind. First and foremost, just thinking about taking money out of your retirement accounts. Some people will come to me as a financial planner and say, hey, I've saved a certain amount of money in my 401k, and when I retire, what do I do? Do I just take it all out at once? How does that work? I cannot stress enough, if you have a lot of pre-tax retirement assets, do not take it all out and put it in your checking account in one big go. Just to give you the example here, if you had $1 million, taking that out in 20 increments over 20 years versus taking it out in 10 versus 5 versus 1 year, the amount of taxes you're likely to pay on those distributions is substantially different. So it's really important that you look at your retirement accounts not as a big ticket that you're just going to cash out one day and then you're just going to have that money to live on. You want to try to keep it in that tax advantaged place as long as you can, so that way you have the ability to take it out in bits and pieces at lower tax brackets. And that way you can preserve your retirement savings longer and have that last a little bit longer for you. Another common thing is step-ups in tax basis. When you pass away, the value of your assets steps up to whatever the current value is. This is really, really important for assets you've owned for a long time. Let's say your home. It's also a really important thing to consider if you and your spouse have significant differences in ages or health, because the value of certain assets could receive significant bumps, and that could save you a lot of money in taxes. I think this is something that Brandon probably deals with on a daily basis with his clients as far as the value of their property. Brandon, do you have anything you'd like to share here?
Yeah, so we do, and some of the issues, when people aren't familiar with the step up in basis, working with seniors, sometimes people think it would be a good idea to add their child to the title to their home, or even to title the home to their child. And those, although those could be, good strategy for other reasons, from a tax perspective, it's usually a bad move, because if you keep it in your name until death, then if there's substantial appreciation, as Dan was saying, the value goes up to the value on date of death. It becomes the basis. And so if the house is later sold, there can be very little gain, unless it's kept for a while and continues to appreciate. But so you don't want to lose that step up if you can avoid it. So that's one thought. And then it also applies to other assets. So I've seen people in estates where there's a lot of different stocks, and things will get a step up to the date of death value, and you have to rely on the brokers to really come up with what that is and figure out, okay, if you've got 20 different stocks, what was the date of death value of each one? And then you have to track it to see, has it gone up, has it gone down? And just to be conscious of all that when you're working with your financial advisor or broker.
Yep. And the big thing I'll say, and not to be too morbid about it, but if you know that the end is coming, don't try to sell all your stuff to simplify things. Make sure you have a good will or trust in place. Make sure you've gotten your estate stuff in order, but don't go on a big selling spree of your assets before you pass away, because whatever you leave behind, you can leave the whole value behind, as opposed to taking a tax hit right before you go. Again, a little morbid, but just a practical thing.
And before we go on, I see there was one question about, is there a time limit on how long a reverse mortgage can last? And the answer is basically no. I mean, it's designed to last, for the life of the senior. You've got to be 62 or older to qualify for one. So it's not going to 20-year-olds. But the idea is just that, unlike a mortgage where you're currently paying the interest on the reverse mortgage is just accruing. So it can go for a long time, but the longer it goes, the more interest accrues. And so the larger amount of equity is eaten up for the eventual payoff of the mortgage.
Well, on that point, just thinking about what happens when we go, we often hear about the estate tax, and I think this is entirely in your domain, Brendan. So I'm going to let you explain this one.
Sure. So there is an estate tax. Right now, we don't have a Colorado estate tax, but there is a federal estate and gift tax. But something that a lot of people are not aware of and are usually surprised to find out is the exemptions from the estate tax have really ballooned up to these enormous numbers that you can see on the slide there. 11.7 million for a single individual and 23.4 million for a couple. So, unless you're an extremely high net worth individual, the estate tax is generally not an issue. And the same for gift tax. You have a lifetime exemption for gift tax, which is these same numbers for an exemption. So you generally don't have to worry about gift tax or estate tax when you're doing your planning.
You really are in the 1% if these are a problem for you.
Right. And, one of the things, though, is that I'm not recalling now, there is a sunset on these numbers, right? Where they shift back to some smaller numbers, but they're still very large.
2025.
Okay. So, yeah, nothing happening to us soon. But there are always proposals to change these. There was a time, I think, when I was first practicing, the exemption was 200,000 something. And, it was an issue for lots of people, but it continued to go up and up. And this is where we are today.
Sure. Well, on that subject, let's talk about inheriting some income. Would you like to talk about Social Security?
Yeah. So Social Security, is a little more complex than people often think. There's early retirement Social Security, there's full retirement, and then there's even something beyond full retirement, where if you can wait, the ages have moved. It used to be everything was 65 for full retirement. Now it depends on when you were born. I think for me, it's 66 and a half now is full retirement. And then if, just using myself as the example, if I were to wait until age 70 to take the Social Security, you actually get a higher amount. There's kind of a built-in interest factor that they add on to give you a larger amount if you delay taking it. Another issue so in any event, you can find out those amounts from Social Security, what you're entitled to based on your work history. And if you don't get something, they usually come in the mail once a year, but if you don't, you can go in and find out. Yeah, Dan makes a good suggestion. You can go to ssa.gov. You can set up your own My Social Security account, and then periodically you can find out what you would be entitled to, and then try to figure out what you would get at early retirement, at full retirement, and then beyond full retirement. One of the reasons I see people sometimes wait even beyond the full retirement is because if they're a married couple, they know that the amount that the one who gets the higher amount can eventually pass that higher one on to the surviving spouse. So like here you see in the second bullet point that a widow or a widower can receive 100% of the deceased's benefit. So if in my example, I were to wait till 70, and so I get a higher amount, but then I did pass away, let's say 75, my wife, if she survived me, would get a significantly higher amount. And I think that increase now is somewhere around 30% or 25 or 30%, increase of waiting until 70 rather than taking full. But of course, we're into the realm of financial planners, because if you take it earlier, then you've got money, and if you can invest it, then the question becomes, were you better off taking it and investing it or waiting? Yeah, so, and it used to be that, at least, in our parents' generation, it was typically the man who had a higher number, and the woman, a spouse, who had a significantly lower number. It's not always the case here. So you have to keep that in mind when it has more to do with your work history and how much you've paid into the program.
Yeah. Another really common place we see retirement income as an inherited asset is going to be through pensions. And again, if you work for the state here in Colorado, you might know that as para. The answer to what you're going to get is going to be very, very, very dependent on what elections you made at retirement. Typically, pensions come with at least one of two payout options, if not more. We would say, for example, the beneficiary's life only, or the original pensioner's life only, where they would receive quote unquote 100% of the benefit, or a joint life benefit that might be lower than 100%, say 50% or 70% of what the full benefit would be, but it lasts for the life of both the original pensioner and their spouse. This is one where there really isn't a good one-size-fits-all solution. I'll give you an example. If somebody was married to a teacher and that teacher was significantly older than them, or they were the same age, but the teacher was male, my general inclination based on life expectancy would be to recommend that they take a joint life benefit. But if the pensioner is much younger than their spouse, or the pensioner is female and of a similar age, then it might make a lot more sense from a life expectancy standpoint to just take the single life benefit. And of course, there's a lot of variables in there, like family history, health levels, and different expectations around that. But this is a common one where you will see a continuation of income past the death of one or the other spouse, depending on who was receiving it and how that was handled. The next thing we want to talk about then is the inheritance of assets. We've somewhat touched on this already, but inheritance is not generally considered taxable income. Whether I'm receiving a family member's home, if I'm receiving the value of their bank accounts, getting a payout from a life insurance policy, or any number of personal property, jewelry, a TV, a bicycle, a car. Typically, unless we're above those estate tax exemption numbers we talked about earlier, we're most likely going to receive those on a tax-free basis. At the same time, there are some special rules around different types of assets. In the case of something like inherited retirement assets, so a para benefit or IRA rollovers, 401ks, that sort of thing, there are different rules around how this happens. Inheriting these is not immediately taxable. So if, for example, I receive a $100,000 IRA when one of my parents passes away, that's not $100,000 of taxable income, but I am going to be required to take that out over a period of time. Typically, what we see in most cases is 10 years if I'm not the spouse. But if I am a spouse, I should have the ability to combine these benefits. So if I had my personal IRA and my spouse passes away, I can combine my spouse's IRA with mine and then essentially have it treated as one big amount. And I may or may not have to start taking that out at some point, depending on how old they were, how old I am, and there's a couple of things that go in there. In the case of Roths, we have similar combination or distribution rules, but that benefit is still untaxed. We're not going to have to pay an income tax on those Roth distributions. Brandon, any thoughts here?
Yeah, so a couple things. One, in people planning their estates, it's important to realize that if you leave your IRA or one of these other accounts that have not been taxed to one beneficiary, and you leave an equivalent amount of cash, let's say, or investment to another beneficiary, you may not be leaving them the same thing, because one is taxable and one is not. And I've seen people make that mistake, where they give an IRA with the same amount to one child and then an investment account to another, not realizing that the child receiving these IRA accounts are going to have to pay taxes. Sometimes the solution, depending on the amounts you're working with and the situation of the senior, is to just convert the account to a Roth IRA and pay the taxes themselves, so that that whole issue is off the table. Another thing we see is that for the non-spouse, who's, let's say, the children receiving IRAs, you can stretch out the taking the money out and having it become taxable. But the law has changed to try to shrink that period that you can keep it for. It used to be you could try to keep it for your own lifespan, but now it's, for most cases, shrunk down to 10 years max, and sometimes 5. The one exception is a disabled person who, let's say, I work with disabled people as well, and sometimes they receive an IRA, and if they receive it in a trust, they can still stretch it over their lifespan. Okay.
And you want to be really careful about who and how you're leaving these things to, because particularly in the case of people with disabilities, you can have an ill effect on their state benefits depending on how that's left to them.
Right. If it's not in trust, you may be giving them, a benefit with some money on the one hand, but you can be disrupting their whole public benefits scheme and their health care on the other. So careful planning.
Yep. Consult your estate attorney for sure. Well, with that, I think I'm going to land squarely in your domain for the next
Okay. So just to go through a few of the basics, when you inherit assets, you may see the terms testate versus intestate. Testate means you have a will, so the will governs where your assets go. Intestate means you don't have a will, so then you've got a statute that's basically like a big family tree that just tells you who inherits depending on which closest relatives are alive at the time. You can inherit by process of law. We sometimes call those kind of automatic inheritance, where you don't have to go through any process, such as a beneficiary designation on a retirement account or a payable on death. Sometimes these are basically the same, POD or transfer on death, TOD. So all of those are just something you fill out. You generally are presented with it when you set up an account, a bank account and a retirement account, but then you can go in and change it at any time. But it has to be done in writing. We have had some cases where people call up, their financial institution and say, I want to change my beneficiary, and they say, no problem, we'll send you something. But if the process doesn't get finished, they didn't fill it out and sign it and send it back, nothing happens. And so their wishes are not honored.
Yep. And I'll tell you, as somebody who deals with the financial institution side on a daily basis, what's in writing matters here. So if you tell me, hey, I want to leave everything to this child, but you never updated the paperwork, that institution does not care about what you had to say. They're going to rely on what the paperwork that you signed and completed. So as your lives evolve, as you get married or divorced, as you have children, if you like one child more than the other, if you stop liking somebody, whatever the case is, make sure you keep this stuff up to date. Because even if you are testate, if you have your will or if you have your trusts established, some of that stuff may or may not be overwritten by what you've done elsewhere. So just stay consistent on that. Check that stuff on a periodic basis.
Okay, and then you may also receive a type of inheritance through a deed. So in Colorado, we do have what are called beneficiary deeds. That's our only type of deed that's revocable. And what it does is just transfer title to one or more persons upon your death. And a married couple can also do a beneficiary deed and have it transfer on the death of the second to die. And the main purpose for those is to avoid a probate. Because we found that there were lots of people who, they wouldn't have to probate but for their home. And so this was a simple way of giving them a chance to avoid probate. And then also they can change their minds and revoke the beneficiary deed. A life estate deed is similar in that it leaves the property to someone else on your death. The difference is that it's not revocable. So once you do it, you and what are called the remainder men who receive the benefit on death both own a piece of that property. And your interest shrinks as you get older because you're guaranteed the right to live there for life, and the remainderment's interest grows. So, so that's a tool that we use actually a lot for Medicaid planning because we know it's a current gift of that remainder interest. And gifting under Medicaid, there's a 5-year look back. So if you do a life estate deed and then 5 years pass, that gift is no longer considered. So it's a way of protecting a home. And then there's a deed in joint tenancy, where you jointly own a property with one or more persons. And if you die, the other person automatically takes full title and they don't have to go through a probate to do that. Okay, revocable living trusts you may have heard of. We basically have 2 types of estate plans, a will-based plan or a trust-based plan. So in the trust-based plan, the idea again is principally to avoid a probate. And so you create a trust, the trust then becomes, you transfer your assets into the trust. The trust is the owner of the bank accounts, the stocks and bonds, the home, etc. And usually you're your own trustee to start out with, and then when you become disabled or you die, someone else is the successor trustee. You don't have to retitle the assets because they're still in the name of the trust. This effectively avoids probate. And then the key becomes when you're doing your trust agreement, you have to identify who are the successor trustees. It's a kind of a parallel to a personal representative handling an estate, would be a successor trustee handling a trust. And then who are your beneficiaries, similar to a will, who receives your property when you die. And, the way we can create trusts under wills, you can create trusts under trusts and have, rather than everything come out at death, you can have sometimes the assets remain in trust for a period of time. Most common would be, where you don't want someone who's either a child or a young adult to get a large sum of money at once. So the money is held in trust for a period of time.
And last but not least.
Well, I'm sorry, one last point to make on that is, as the probate systems go, Colorado has one of the simpler and cheaper ones of the various states. So some people, many people in Colorado do just do wills, particularly if it's not a complex estate. And I'd say in my own practice, I may be 80% wills and 20% trusts. One exception to that would be, for example, if you own property in multiple states, let's say real estate in multiple states, you're better off with a trust generally, because otherwise you could end up with multiple probates in different states. So you don't want that. Okay.
And last but not least, Medicaid.
We talk a little about income for Medicaid purposes, just a kind of an introduction. So the way to think of it now is, after the Affordable Care Act, we basically have 2 types of Medicaid. We have Medicaid for healthcare for people under age 65, if you financially qualify for it. So this is, Medicaid. It's not private insurance and it's not Medicare. You can have Medicare for younger people sometimes if they're disabled. If you get, let's say, SSDI for disability, after 2 years, you do qualify for Medicare, even if you're a younger person. But Medicaid has taken a greater role in just ordinary health insurance after the Affordable Care Act. And the key term there for income is something they call MAGI, modified adjusted gross income. And the test can be quite different from the test for Medicaid for long-term care for older or disabled people. So and it does change from time to time too. The rules are somewhat complex, so it's important to get some assistance if you're trying to qualify based on MAGI Medicaid. And it's also different in terms of whose income counts. For long-term care, generally, you're only looking at the income of the person who's going to receive Medicaid. You're not looking at the spouse, you're not looking at the children. For MAGI Medicare, you're back to this kind of household income term and some income. I mean, there's some quite odd rules. The income of a younger person might count, but only if that person is filing a tax return. So, it's just compromises that were made in the legislation. So you have to be careful with that. So the one I deal with more is, Medicaid for long-term care. In Colorado, we do have Medicaid that, unlike some other states, we can have it pay for home care, have it pay for assisted living, and have it pay for skilled nursing or memory care. So we have a very wide net of the types of care that can come under Medicaid and long-term care. And as most people know, there are limits on both assets and income to qualify. And we're not going to go into those really here, except to say that we are what's called an income cap state, which means that the idea is that your income, if you are the person applying for Medicaid, you have to be under a cap. The cap actually is a fairly low number. It's only, right now, it's $2,382 per month. So some time ago, there was an issue in federal court, decades ago now, over what happens to people who are over the income cap but don't have enough income to actually pay for a nursing home, which is now somewhere in the $8,500, $10,000 a month. So they came up with this compromise that even if you're over the cap, as long as you're under the average cost of a nursing home in the region you live in, you can use a type of trust, a simple trust called an income trust. And all that does is receive the income and pay it over to the nursing home every month. So in effect, your income can be quite a bit higher, more in the under 8,000 or 9,000 range, and you can still, in theory, qualify for Medicaid, which is somewhat unusual, and we don't see that often. But what we do see is that there's no cap at all on the income of the community spouse. So that's the spouse who's not receiving Medicaid, who often is staying at home. And as a result of changes in federal law, principally, we have something we can use in Colorado where we take the excess assets, if you have too much in assets as a married couple, and we use a special type of annuity. We've talked about annuities before, which are different kinds of investments. This is an annuity that essentially is a very low yielding annuity for investment purposes, less than 1% typically. But what it does is it lets you take some extra assets if you're over the asset number for Medicaid and convert them to a flow of monthly income to the community spouse. So it helps the community spouse live in the community and not become impoverished. But at the same time, it gives you a way to protect some of the assets that would otherwise disqualify for Medicaid. So just to mention in passing, the individual assets, the person applying has to be under $2,000. the person, the community spouse, is now 130,380, and you can have a home with equity up to 595,000 in Colorado and still qualify for Medicaid. It's not, if you're a married couple, the home is actually protected if the community spouse lives beyond the one who's institutionalized and receiving Medicaid.
And with that, we will go ahead and open it up for questions. And I already see one from Sharon here in the Q&A section. So I'll go ahead and jump on this one.
Sure.
Things that you leave to nonprofits, whether it's cash, whether it's real estate, whatever the case is, functionally from a tax standpoint, is treated as a charitable contribution and typically gets removed from the estate as a whole. So there's not really a big tax impact to leaving the asset to charity. It does count as a donation of the current fair market value of that real estate. So if you're leaving behind $100,000 worth of land and you bought it for $20,000 back in the 60s or something like that, it is treated as a $100,000 donation to that nonprofit.
Great. Do we, you answered my question earlier about reverse mortgages.
Yes.
Do we have any other questions that anyone wants to type into the chat? If not, I am just going to point out, I included the link to ssa.gov in the chat. If anyone wants to check out what their social security status might be, or what they're looking to get and when they get to get that. I think for those of us born in the 80s, it's a long time until we get our full retirement.
Yeah.
I would also highlight, just because you ended on Medicaid long-term care on October 7th, we are going to have one presentation exclusively dedicated to Medicaid long-term care, because it is, as you could tell from this brief glance, a meaty and very, very complicated topic. So I feel like this was a great introduction to that. I just want to thank you both so much. Financial literacy is such a difficult thing to talk about. I think in our culture, we're kind of trained not to spend a lot of time thinking about money or talking about money. And it is just so important. And so important to understand these things. So thank you both for all the work you do. And really just bringing to light and shedding some light on these topics. We do have another Q&A question. So I understood that the reverse mortgage company actually takes title upon the contract, but it is just a loan against the property. And should I pass then they recover the value of the loan and the remainder of the value stays with the estate?
Right. It's the latter. It's a mortgage. It's not, that's actually a very common, there is a very common misconception that they just take title to the house. But in reality, it's another type of mortgage. As I was trying to explain before, if you inherit a house with a mortgage on it, there is a federal law that says that the mortgage company cannot call the mortgage if you have inherited the home and you continue to make the payments. But in the case of a reverse mortgage, that is not the case. You have a limited period of time to either refinance, to basically pay it off. So you either refinance it or you sell it so you can pay it off. So it is just a mortgage though. If someone gets a line of credit and they only use $100,000 and their house is worth $500,000, only the $100,000 plus whatever interest has accrued is going to be paid off. Not, they're not going to get the $500,000 house.
Is there Is there ever a situation where someone would have a balloon payment due on a reverse mortgage? I feel like
It
I've
is
heard
in
that from
essence.
folks. Yeah.
It is in essence a balloon. I mean,
Okay.
that's what happens, because you don't get the option of paying it over a long period of time. It's, it's generally 6 months. And I have seen families that work with the reverse mortgage companies, and they'll give them sometimes an extra 6 months. So I have seen that. But that's usually, you tell them, that there are one or more adult children who are living in the home who want to stay there, and they're working on refinancing, but they need more time. And usually they'll give that to you. And of course, they're getting paid for it because their interest is still accruing.
Well, excellent. And thank you so much for those clarifications.
Sure.
We are at 1 o'clock. So again, I just want to thank both Brandon and Dan on this. This has been so educational and so wonderful. And again, I think there are a lot of questions that your presentation cleared up that I think typically in our social lives we're afraid to ask for fear of looking less than smart. And I think there's just so much that is not understood generally about income and finances in general. So thank you so much. It's really, really such an important topic.
Thank you, Brett. Thanks everybody for coming.
Yeah, thank you. And we will be posting this on our YouTube channel. We've been uploading those links. I don't know that we have our first ones uploaded just yet, but we hope to do so soon. But you can watch all of last year's presentations at this time and keep an eye out for this year's presentations, which will be uploaded shortly after we have time to upload to the cloud and then upload to YouTube. So thank you so much and have a great afternoon.
Okay.
Take care.
Stan.
Thank you. Have a good day.